Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Noëleen Murray, and I hold the Research Chair in Critical Architecture and Urbanism at the University of Pretoria.
Good afternoon. I'm Svea Josephy, Associate Professor, Michaela School of Fine Art at the University of Cape Town.
Learning from Steenkop. When Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi went to the desert town of Las Vegas, they produced a book that documented the architecture they found in new ways. Writing in the preface to the revised edition of Learning from Las Vegas, Scott Brown playfully claimed, "We architects can learn from Rome and Las Vegas and from looking around us wherever we happen to be." In August 2018, we visited a small desert town in the Northern Cape of South Africa. Our interest was in a building designed by Roelof Uyttenbogaert and Norbert Rosendahl around the same time in the 1970s. Together as creative practitioners and academics, our work for the last 20 years focused on considerations of architecture and urbanism, variously writing, theorizing, and photographing cities and structures. Our work together is very much a critique of architectural photography, a visualizing and thinking about cities and structures that is critical and analytical. Our collaborative work is set up in dialogue with conventional forms of architectural scholarship and photography. The work we're going to share with you today has as its central focus the question of the place, form, and future of modern architecture as heritage or not. For some time, we've been working on a project that emerged out of Noëleen's doctoral work in African Studies at UCT around the questions of apartheid's modernities. Our current collaborative project is a documentation of architect and UCT professor Roelof Uyttenbogaert's buildings. Uyttenbogaert died in the late 1990s, and his papers are lodged in the UCT Library's Department of Manuscripts and Archives. And during the last 12 years, we've been collecting and constructing our own archive, and we've documented a large percentage of Uyttenbogaert's public buildings and projects, as well as sites all around South Africa. These include the Crown Mines Project, the Welkom Dutch Reformed Church, the UCT Sports Centre, the Werkmüller Centre, the Salt River Community Centre, the Bonwood Factory, which is now the Hilton Doubletree Hotel, the Garden of Remembrance in Simonstown, and the Steenkop Community Centre, which is the subject of today's presentation that we titled Learning from Steenkop with reference to Scott Brown's contribution to the thinking about architecture and heritage differently.
The presentation is a rough cut of the raw fieldwork images that we have made. We shall be presenting our mock-ups of our publication, drawn from photo books in progress, created in 2021, as a record of a dialogue between an architect and an artist. Steenkop was a small mission settlement of the London Missionary Society and later taken over by the Rhenish Mission, and is now a post-apartheid town 70 kilometers short of the Namibian border and on the N7 National Road. The Northern Cape has been mined for diamonds and minerals since the boom in Kimberley in the 1870s, with large tracts of land owned by De Beers. The building that we are interested in is the Steenkop Community Centre, completed by Uyttenbogaert and Rosendahl in 1978. The centre is situated on the site of a former community vegetable garden and was commissioned by De Beers as a contribution to the upliftment of the residents of the settlement around the same time as the mining company was leaving the area, a parting gift.
The Surveyor General's Office, today the NGI, regularly photographed settlements across South Africa from the air for population management control and other surveillance purposes under apartheid. The archive contained in these from 1964 to 1985 show the spatial transition and the growth of the town into which the community centre scheme was inserted. The award-winning centre, built by Uyttenbogaert and Rosendahl, was from its inception hardly used by the community, for whose use the architects imagined. The imposing forms and austere finishes that rise out of the small-scale fabric of the mission housing dominate the landscape and contributed to the poor reception of the building by residents. Very soon the building started to become run down and derelict and was abandoned. A new, more conventionally recognisable community centre was developed close by, and residents gravitated towards the new centre, which was deemed more central, practical and usable, with the unassuming facade and ample parking, and a hall which could be decorated for festivities such as weddings, funerals and other events. Uyttenbogaert is considered one of the masters of South African modern architecture. Our interest is less concerned with the narratives of great men and great lives, so often portrayed in monographs and through architectural and art history, where it is a trope of both. Rather, we are interested in the life of these buildings and the people who have been subjected to them. The way we work is through visiting the sites celebrated as seminal instances of modern architectural heritage. Very often what we find is buildings have changed over time, and comparing these changes to the original visions is very much part of the archival documentary research that we undertake, alongside our contemporary investigations. The vision for Steenkop in the minds of Burghardt and Rosendahl was to create an oasis of sorts in the arid landscape of the town. It was envisaged as much as an urban design scheme as a provision of facilities. The functional program for the centre envisaged a community hall, daycare facilities, a swimming pool, a community garden, and was conceptualised as both a refuge from the hot sun and an inspiring structural form that used natural light and natural materials in sculptural and organic flourishes of its modernist form. The scheme as described by the architects was romantic in the sense of the Western tradition in art and architecture, echoing the materiality and shape of the rocky stone outcrops known as koppies. The materiality extended into the very construction of the building, as the bricks and cement were made locally in the sand from the area. The building was instantly revered by architects and celebrated even by the UIA, the Union of International Architects Special Edition on Architects of Southern Africa in 1985, at the very height of apartheid. Burghardt's experience as a Rome scholar documenting the Italian hill towns is important in his design of the Steenkop Community Centre. There's also evidence in his plans of the romance of the Grand Tour in Rome, central to which is the idea of the ruin. Abbé Lauger's famous etching signals the beginning of this romantic tension with the classicism of ancient Rome. Burghardt brought this romantic sentiment to many of his designs and urban schemes, yet the irony of what we found in the contemporary landscape was in fact a ruin, in place of a romantic building. The trajectory of the passage of the building into ruin is paralleled by the claims and calls for Burghardt's work to be celebrated in the category of modern heritage.
In photography, there's been a recent fascination with what critics have called ruin porn, where abandoned buildings and sites of trauma have become objects of opportunistic photographers capturing urban decay and structures in decline. Often photographed in muted colour or black and white and shown on Instagram, modernist and brutalist buildings are staged and emphasised as derelict, abandoned, and accompanied by calls to conserve and repair as the tragic losses of heritage. This practice often uses lighting, tone, and depressing overcast skies to foreground the demise of the structures, which were once very grand. Often, there's a nostalgia for these and similar buildings, where images are filtered, toned, or manipulated to emphasize the material deterioration. We have followed this phenomenon with interest and discomfort, as ruin porn constructs and manipulates the viewer and image alike. So how then do we photograph the remnants of modern architecture as we find it in situ? Architectural photography, as we have written elsewhere, seeks to show buildings at the moment of their completion, to showcase the realization of the project's vision. In other words, to portray the works of architecture in their best possible light. These architectural projects are almost always promotional and not seen in their context. In our approach, we too seek to show the buildings as we encounter them in their best possible light, using natural light on the forms of the building, and we time our visits according to the light. Yet, as these photos of Steenkop show, the polish of the finished product has disappeared over time. Our images determinedly seek to show the buildings as we found them, without consistently emphasizing them as ruin, so showing the decay of the building, but also showing tenderness and care. In our broader thinking and work over the last years, we have also considered the social, physical, political, and environmental contexts in which these buildings are inserted into sites, towns, or landscapes. Specifically, we have deliberately asserted the colonial and apartheid contexts that were so noticeably absent in the portrayal of buildings and architectural photography from the 1960s onwards. Rather than the singular image that is a hallmark of current ruin porn photographer, we are making photo books. We believe the photo book offers the opportunity to present visual arguments alongside our more conventional academic writing that allows us to work with multiple responses to visiting the sites. This includes their local contexts, archives, and published material in the form of journal articles, as well as archives of photographs, drawings, sites, notes, building plans where these exist in part or whole.
Heritage documentation, of course, also does this within a much more formal format. Our photo books are positioned in relation to this practice of the heritage report or documentation entry, where we raise questions about the selection, role, and classificatory models of heritage practice, both locally and internationally. These books are collections of our creative interpretations and critical research. Whereas heritage is set up to preserve, as preservable, restored, fixed, we are attentive to the used, discarded, appropriated, and eroded. We are interested in the post-work of architecture as we find its dematerialization, preservation, or in fact, domestication. The final images here are from the tragic events that unfolded on the 18th of April 2021, where much of the Jagger reading room in the library of the University of Cape Town was tragically destroyed in a runaway bushfire. Contained in the basement were the archives of Openburgart, including Steinkorf and many other buildings. And over the following weeks, we found ourselves involved in the emergency recovery of these archives and the question of the future of heritage posed by the ruin of the archive itself. This provided the impetus for the assemblage of our books as a way to think through documentation and ruin in a practice-based manner. Thank you.